Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to the Monitoring as Code workshop at Sensomologic Illuminate. My name is Caleb, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, Troy. We both work on the product team at Sumo. Troy actually is one of the very first developer advocates at Sensomologic. And I come to Sumo by way of Sensu. I was formerly the co-founder and CEO at Sensu, which was acquired by Sensomologic earlier this year. Been working in and around open source for around a decade. Both Troy and I are located in Portland. That is not the case for a lot of the folks you'll meet in Sensomologic, where it's quite a distributed company with people all around the world. But we are both here in Portland, Oregon. We have some reminders for you since this is an interactive workshop. In order to make it interactive, we would love to see your faces. And we may invite you actually to unmute yourself and comment, but during the presentation, we'll ask that your microphones are off. This would be a great time to introduce yourselves in chat, maybe first names plus, whereabouts in the world are you? And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Troy will be monitoring the chat. And I do not get my feelings hurt very easily. So there's no amount of interruption that will slow us down. So please feel free to ask those questions. We will be sharing information also in the chat. So pay attention to that. And Troy, if I can give you the task of setting a timer, we're going to try and stop and take a break about halfway through the presentation. So we can just pace ourselves in that way. And I really prefer to keep things casual and fun. So that will be helpful for me in case I make any mistakes. We'll keep it casual, but also just make it more focused on what we can learn together and for us collecting your feedback on what is good, bad, and ugly about the workshop. We have shared in advance some prerequisites. If you are missing this last one, if you don't have Docker on your workstation or Vagrant, that's probably something you can do now while I get us going this morning. So last chance summer dance to do that. And now just a brief overview before we jump into the actual live workshop materials. I thought it would be a great time to introduce Sensu. What is Sensu? How does it work? What is monitoring as code? What do we mean by that? And what are we going to cover in the workshop? So we'll go ahead and dive in. So first and foremost, Sensu is an observability pipeline that delivers monitoring as code for any cloud. What does that mean? We'll get into in more detail. At a high level, Sensu is an infrastructure and application monitoring platform. It's designed provides a sort of automation solution for DevOps and SRE teams used by thousands of companies around the world. Sensu is also an open core product. That means there's an open source version available as well as a commercially supported version that we distribute and support. And one of the great things about Sensu is it lets you reuse your existing monitoring tools. And you'll see this phrase on the Sensu website that we offer complete visibility from bare metal to Kubernetes. So Sensu was sort of designed in what we called cloud native. We said Sensu was cloud native before cloud native was a thing. That just meant it was born out of the public cloud era, and now works very well in cloud native environments, but also in traditional bare metal computing environments. Some popular use cases for Sensu are to eliminate data silos by integrating with your data platform of choice. If you are here at Sensomologic Illuminate, should certainly be the Sensomologic Continuous Intelligence Platform. So Sensu can help get a ton of data into Sensomologic to help with the observability of your systems. And the primary way we do that is to help you consolidate monitoring tools. So, our approach to this is to help you avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So if you have already some teams were using Nagios, some were instrumenting their applications with StatsD and sending those metrics to Datadog. Some are using Telegraph, maybe are making metrics available via Prometheus, or you've used an older version of Sensu. It's been around for a long time. All of the plugins and instrumentation that you've come to know and trust from all of those different platforms are all natively supported in Sensu. So you can keep the plugins, the instrumentation, the collection component, and get onto a sort of standardized platform. And then lastly, we'll talk about this the least today, but Sensu also provides us some solutions around automated remediation. So what does this mean? You add it all up, you can monitor any app or service using your existing tools on any cloud. So how does that work? At a very high level, Sensu, if you can understand these 4 building blocks, you can understand how Sensu works. There's a ton more to Sensu than this, but these are the basic concepts that we provide a solution for collecting data, and then you can filter, transform, and process that data. And all the data that we collect, we normalize in a sort of like structured event format that includes metrics, it includes health checks, things like that. And then we give you this very powerful rules engine so you can filter that data as it flows to the pipeline. This is part of what helps Sensu scale so well. We can determine which pieces of information are interesting and need some action to be taken on them, and which pieces we can sort of drop on the floor. And on the right-hand side of the pipeline, we process that data. That's to get it into platforms like Sumo Logic and also other systems of record. That can be your alerts and incident management tools, a CMDB, and again, other automation platforms. And when you zoom out, once you have configured Sensu, now what you're doing really is you're giving yourself a platform to do some workflow automation around monitoring. Like it's not, one of the things we like to say about monitoring is that's only as useful as the monitoring or observability data is only as useful as what you can do with it. And so, getting it into those systems of record, configuring those workflows, having those rules in place to avoid or reduce alert fatigue, super critical. I skipped this transform step earlier. This is, our lives as systems integrators is the way I like to think of ourselves as IT administrators or DevOps or site reliability engineering teams, is that we are doing the thing from that scene in the movie Apollo 13, putting the square peg in the round hole quite often. And so in some cases, it could be that you have legacy instrumentation, old plugins, and you're trying to get that data into a modern platform like Sumo Logic. You can have the opposite scenario where you have modern instrumentation and you're trying to get that data into some legacy system of record inside your organization that maybe only accepts XML via a TCP socket. Well, what are you supposed to do with that? So Sensu allow you to mutate payloads as they flow through our pipeline, perhaps even transforming JSON to XML. And then the process, or what we call handlers in Sensu, can just forward that data to a remote TCP socket. So we give you all the building blocks you need to solve some really interesting problems. We're sort of moving from right to left in this high-level architecture diagram here. So now you can see our agent, the Sensu agent, its role in this platform is to be an event producer, basically. So it takes those instructions, can go and execute old Nagios plugins or other monitoring scripts that you might have, capture the output, wrap it in this event context, shove it onto the pipeline. We do the same thing with StatsD metrics we consume, Prometheus metrics. We can, we have SNMP plugins, so we can pull SNMP devices. Like these are just a few examples of data sources you can get into Sensu. And then when you zoom all the way out, we layer on top of that a control plane that's multi-tenant, gives you namespaces and role-based access controls, integrates with your SSO and things like that. How does this work together with Sumo Logic? We'll show you just briefly in a demo, but there's just a ton of rich data that comes out of Sensu that works very nicely with Sumo Logic. We're announcing some of the very initial integrations, direct integrations between Sensu and Sumo Logic this week at Illuminate. So you'll learn more about that in the coming days. And now, what is monitoring as code? I'm not going to really go into too much detail here because I actually pre-recorded Caleb is also giving a Illuminate Spotlight presentation at Illuminate this week. So you can go watch that video. I just stole a few slides from myself and shoved them in here. So I'll go through these super quickly, which is, what is monitoring as code? It's part of an everything as code initiative. Basically, it should look and feel like other as code workflows. You should have the same expectations for what you can do with monitoring as code in terms of testability, sharing, self-service access. And I think the thing that Sensu and Sumo Logic are bringing to the narrative around monitoring as code is that it should be an end-to-end solution, not just you can Google monitoring as code. You're going to see every vendor is going to have a story for this, or observability as code, they may say. But if you look beyond the blog, headline, is there more than just automated installation of agents and the collection of data? What else can you do with the as code framework? So to illustrate this, we have on the left a modern infrastructure as code template. This is a Kubernetes deployment manifest. And on the right, Sensu monitoring code template. Both of these allow you to describe some solution and its dependencies as a declarative code, basically as a YAML files here. And both of these templates can be consumed by their corresponding APIs and bring the systems into their desired state. The thing is, this thing you see on the left, this is the deployment of a Sensu sidecar in Kubernetes, Sensu agent sidecar. So that is a agent deployment. We would classify that as infrastructure as code for monitoring, not actually monitoring as code, not what can I do with this data. So if we think about what that end-to-end solution includes, that's the instrumentation, that is both the installation of the agent, but also what are those plugins or scripts or other sources of data that we need to manage the instrumentation. How and when are we collecting that data? What additional diagnosis may be needed at the edge when we detect some failure? The detection, the filtering engine, that rules engine we talked about. Does it give you controls to correlate, deduplicate, and generally reduce alert fatigue? Certainly feature 0 of any monitoring or observability platform is incident management or some sort of alerting engine. We have that in spades in Sensu. How to process that data, that means storing it in an analytics platform like Sumo Logic, and also triggering those automated remediations. So now I want to give a super high level overview of the workshop. And in the Sensu Go workshop, there are 16 lessons. We're going to cover basically the first half on the left. And the workshop is intended to be very interactive, as we said in our introductory slide. Thank you, Bryce, for turning on your camera. It's good to see another face besides my buddy Troy's. And so all of the...
we will be looking for a lot of thumbs up to check for understanding. So
yep.
Yeah, as you see things and you're like, that's cool, just stick your thumbs up, be like, yes, yep. This is awesome.
Or head nods are welcome. So yeah, all the lessons are intended to be interactive, except for the first one is just an introduction. It's a presentation section of the workshop. After that, there are exercises in every single lesson, and really the key lessons to become competent with Sensu are lessons 4 through 8. These are the lessons we want every Sensu user to go through this training. Lessons 9 and 10 are sort of recommended once you have completed lessons 1 through 8. And then the other ones will be available, on an as needed basis or for advanced use cases. Not every single Sensu user needs to know these. Also, they're not done yet. The workshop is sort of actively under development. So those will be released in the coming weeks and months. Yeah, so our goals for the workshop, we want to get you introduced to this concept, monitoring as code. What does it look like? What does it feel like to do monitoring as code? Along the way, you're going to learn some basic concepts of Sensu. You're going to get familiar with our command line tool we call Sensu Cuddle and the Sensu API. Really importantly, you're going to learn how to use this workshop because, as we said, there are new lessons coming in the not too distant future. We will also keep the workshop updated as there are new releases of Sensu, new features to take advantage of. And so the main takeaway today is we want to get the workshop installed on your workstation, get you going through the first few lessons. It doesn't matter if you get all the way to the end in the limited time we have together today. We will invite you to join the Sensu community also at the end of our presentation. And now you know 2 people who work on Sensu at Sumo Logic, Troy and Caleb. But we'll also invite you to reach out if you really want to take a deeper dive, get a one-on-one demo. You can do that through your account manager at Sumo Logic or directly by using the contact form on the Sensu website. We'll show that at the end. And now just for a brief demo, this is sort of fast forwarding to the end. We're not going to even get this far in the workshop today, but this is an example of Sensu's real-time inventory data which is observable or sort of visible in the Sumo Logic dashboard. And you can see it's interactive. I can sort of drill down, look at it, and oops, I probably got logged out. I was surprised that I was still logged in. So yeah, you can sort of view your data here. You can drill down. We have, these are new Sensu dashboards, sort of introductory Sensu dashboards being made available in the Sumo Logic app catalog. That will include the ability to go sort of like zoom in and look at a specific entity, and you can filter these lists. So I can say what's going on with my Nginx hosts. Oops, if you spell it correctly, like that. You can sort of drill down. Again, I can like drop into one of these hosts. So that drill down is sort of linked there in Sensu. This data is all coming from a Sensu deployment. So, I can get here also from my Sensu dashboard, and that same like inventory of systems that are under management here, I can get from Sensu directly back into the Sumo Logic dashboards and whatnot. So that integration is available. What else did I want to show you? And now, once you have this all working, I'll give you just another sort of cool preview. You're already familiar, likely. What do you say?
I just said this thing is so cool. Like,
yeah.
Stuff. This blew my mind last night when we went through it ahead of
it. So you're likely already familiar with Sumo Logic's capabilities as a log management and observability platform, but now thinking about, okay, how can I fill gaps in the observability of my systems using Sensu? There's all sorts of data, as we just discussed, that you can get into that platform, including, I'm going to show you just like using one of the Sensu APIs. I'm going to, oops, this is probably not going to work. There, now it will work. I'm going to curl event payload, just small, lightweight JSON payload to my Sensu API. I will get a response code back telling me that an event was created. If I go, let me move this Zoom thing out of my way. If I go back to the Sensu dashboard, notice I created this event with the entity named Illuminate Workshop. So I see that, actually, if you want to make this super live demo, I'm going to delete this event out of Sensu and create that, send this event again. What Sensu will do is say, ooh, I just processed an event for an entity that I've never seen before. Refresh this. And so there I'm seeing an entity appear in Sensu, so the real-time inventory capabilities. I can see there's an error. I have not consumed enough coffee yet today. And if I go back to the Sumo Logic dashboard and look at the live tail, I'm seeing those events stream directly through from Sensu to Sumo Logic. And within a few moments, it takes a moment, I think, from ingestion to making the data available in search. If I do this and rerun the search, within a few moments, though, yeah, those events are available for searching in Sumo Logic. So this is just a sort of a sneak peek into what we're going to accomplish together today. So let's start our workshop. We're going to do a quick poll. Let's see. I guess I could have made a poll in Zoom, but I'm just going to ask everybody to put it in the chat. Give me a Mac, Linux, Windows, or other, what operating system you're using. Hopefully not other. We've got you covered if you're on Mac, Linux, or Windows. It's like every other workshop, we will have no Windows users in it. So it's helpful for us to know if we need to be prepared for Windows. Okay, a few Windows users, cool.
If you are on other though, we super want to hear about it, because that's the fun stuff. Like if you're running this on some kind of like, I don't know, operating system you wrote for your own Raspberry Pi,
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Although we do have Sensu Agent and Sensu Cuddle, the command line tool, binaries for like every weird Linux architecture you can think of, even MIPS builds, ARM builds, we support it all. So even if you are, that could probably still work. Okay, so now I'm going to invite you, Troy's going to drop this link in the chat. I'm going to invite you to come to the Sensu Go workshop in GitHub. How am I going to do this? I should have thought ahead a little bit more on this one. Maybe I'll do it here. There we go. So the Sensu Go workshop is available on GitHub, and we are going to jump in with lesson 1. And again, this content is soon also going to have videos. So you'll see pre-recorded Caleb and Troy doing a little dance inside of each one of these lessons. Instead, today you're getting live Caleb and Troy. And so
haven't decided if I'm going to play guitar behind those or just keep
exactly.
it quiet.
So our goals for this, again, this introductory lesson is mostly just a presentation. We want to introduce you to the observability pipeline. I've sort of done that already. There's information here about the Sensu architecture, our data model, and how you do this monitoring as code thing with Sensu. And this lesson is intended for basically everyone who wants to learn more about Sensu. I'm not going to repeat myself about this. How does Sensu work? I sort of touched on this, is where I left off in my introductory presentation. There's some interesting use cases in here, examples. So I like the second one, for example, which is, we've detected a failure and now we're seeing a resolution event. Sensu can not only create, but also resolve events in your incident management systems or send resolution messages into Slack, things like that. Just one of many hundreds of possible use cases there. I want to talk briefly about the data model, and then I'm going to encourage you all to sort of just skim over the rest of the information here, and then we'll be ready to move on to lesson 2, and that's when the fun interactive bits begin. So the Sensu data model, as we said, is or Sensu, as we said, is a control plane. We have this sort of like event-driven architecture. So we normalize all observability data as events. Events can contain metrics and other service health information, and that makes it sort of easy to reason about what's happening in Sensu. And because we have this consistent event data structure, this plays extraordinarily nicely with your search capabilities and whatnot that you have in Sumo Logic. So every event contains event metadata that's like labels and annotations. Every observation in Sensu is associated with an entity, like a server or a pod in Kubernetes, compute instance in the public cloud. And then an event may optionally contain like health check information or metric data. Every event has an ID, so you can sort of trace how that's processed through the Sensu system. And of course, a key piece of data for all monitoring and observability systems are timestamps. And then I'll let you go ahead either on my screen share, or hopefully you are looking at the workshop in your browser. We'll give you a couple minutes to sort of skim over the rest of the information here, and then we will move on to lesson 2. And please let me know if you have any questions so far in the chat. I'll take a look at those while we allow folks some time to read. A second opportunity for background music.
Okay, if I have to.
It might wake your kids up.
I hope it does. They're supposed to be in class. I didn't tune my guitar. I tuned Sensu last night, but I didn't tune my guitar.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That'll be the title of my my book.
Okay, so a couple things to note as we go through the workshop here. You'll notice lots of links in the workshop, and then we will even link out to even more additional reading materials. That's strongly encouraged for you if you're interested in any of the ideas that are represented here. there's lots of more additional information, even some of them linked to webinars that we have hosted in the past. So more video content if you prefer that style of learning. All right, so now comes the fun part. We're going to move on to lesson 2, that is setting up the workshop environment. Our goals for this lesson, we're going to make sure everyone has Sensu up and running on your workstation, on your laptop. And again, this is intended for basically all Sensu users. And our prerequisites should have been shared by email a couple weeks ago, I believe last night, and at the beginning of my presentation today. But more or less, if you have any sort of like IT day-to-day responsibilities, DevOps, site reliability engineering, automation engineering, whatever various job titles you may carry, you probably have all of these tools. Depending on your organization, it's possible you don't have Docker, in which case we have a sort of alternate solution for that using Vagrant. Please let us know in the chat if you need some help with Vagrant, because I don't think we have that documented here in the workshop yet. But what's going to happen in this workshop environment is we basically are deploying a sort of reference architecture environment. So most of us are probably using something like Slack, or another chat framework that we may want to get alerts in from our monitoring system. We have integrations with all those tools, but in order to keep a nice like standalone training environment, we offer a built-in Rocket Chat. It's sort of like an open source Slack. So the workshop environment deploys the Sensu platform. It deploys the Sensu agent. I guess I should mention also, Sensu is not a SaaS service. It's deployed, the Sensu pipeline itself is deployed on-prem alongside your other applications and services. This is useful for one of the use cases I didn't read in the previous lesson, which is that Sensu can be used to sort of reduce or filter what data you're sending to Sumo Logic. So if you want to collect metrics around important events, but perhaps reduce your total costs, Sensu can be useful in that way, besides just filling in gaps in your observability. So yeah, we have a Sensu backend, one Sensu agent deployed in this environment, a chat environment. We have also alternate reference architectures for the workshop. So we are going to be deploying what we call the default environment that assumes you're going to use Sensu with Sumo Logic. But there's also other like time series database environments where we deploy even the telemetry stack with like Grafana for our dashboard into that environment. And then Sensu has secrets management integration. If you're using something like HashiCorp Vault inside of your organization, we can integrate with that directly. But for the purposes of our workshop, we will deploy our own Vault dev server. Okay, so let's install the workshop. The scenario is you're new to Sensu and you're using this workshop. You want to mimic this environment like I just described. So to accomplish this, we're going to set up our local sandbox environment using Docker Compose. This is the time where I will pay attention to the chat.
There's one person asking about...
Ben Abrams says he's using AIX. Hi, Ben. Ben is a great friend of Sensu, one of our legendary open source contributors to Sensu as well. But I suspect some of these resources may even be new to Ben because we've never had such comprehensive training before. So he's probably just curious how the workshop works. Okay, so step number one, we're gonna, and the other thing about the workshop, the thing I forgot to show in my little brief demo is we have set up the workshop so that literally every step we're gonna take together, or as you work through the workshop yourself, you can copy and paste from the command line. So step number one, clone this repository. You can copy, GitHub has recently added these little copy and paste buttons. So you can literally copy that command, run it on your laptop. And then the very next step will be to run this Docker Compose command. I see in the chat, one person is saying they would like some help with Vagrant. So I can do that. I also failed to show one of the things I wanted to show in the demo, which is when you are working through this exercise here. So when you run this Docker compose up command, what you're going to see is a sort of longer version of this Docker compose up. I have already pre-fetched all the Docker containers, so you're not seeing the Docker downloads. And there's one Docker container, custom Docker container that we build for this workshop. So you'll see some output by running the up command. You'll see some output indicating that we're building a container. But then at the end of all that output, we start up all of these services. If you're a Tmux nerd like myself, you can go in this like multi-pane view and see the diagnostic information coming out of Docker. But the short version is basically we provision the whole entire workshop environment. If I take that environment down and show you that in this repo, we have a Vagrant file. This Vagrant file assumes VirtualBox or VMware Fusion drivers, and all it's really doing is giving you like a thin wrapper around this Docker Compose stuff. So it will download a Vagrant box and install the same tools we said we needed, which is Docker and Docker Compose. And then it's going to sort of volume mount the contents of this directory into that VM and do the same step that we just indicated in the workshop. And if I give you a brief demo of that, I did not practice this last night, so let's see what happens. We're just going to do it live together. You should just be able to run the Vagrant up command. It looks like I do already have that Vagrant box, so it does a little port forwarding configuration on my machine and make sure that I can SSH into this Vagrant box, and then it's going to go and like provision the node. So if you can't install Docker on your workstation, the workaround is install Docker in a VM on your workstation. So both of those things have been provided for in our workshop. And this is great to know, if you are here to learn Sensu in advance of other folks in your company learning Sensu, it may be that some, people are more comfortable with Vagrant than they are with Docker. And the good news is we just want to make it easy for you to get all the tools that you need for the workshop deployed on your machine. And that is absolutely the case with either configuration. I don't know if I will let this run to completion because we probably need to keep moving. How about we can start getting some thumbs up in the workshop if you have successfully cloned the repository, step 1, and you are running the Docker Compose up command or Vagrant up, and things are so far humming along nicely for you. We'll take some thumbs up. Looks like it's working for Bryce. Things will start moving much more quickly after we get past this exercise. Let us know in the chat also if you're stuck, if you need any help. David, thank you for calling out that there is a Samba share in this workshop. So one of the later exercises in Sensu involves our distribution mechanism for plugins. And that does not use Samba, but for the workshop environment, we make it easy for you to basically drag and drop plugins into the workshop environment using a local Samba share. So yeah, David, nice call out. Turn off your Samba SMB file sharing to avoid a port conflict there. I believe if you don't do that, the environment will still come up with one error that you can most likely safely ignore. Others are saying Docker Compose.
Getting to that part of the workshop where we need that today anyway.
Yeah, correct. When this step completes, so my Vagrant is still running, I sort of want to, this is like a race to see, can my Vagrant come up to prove that it works in time for me to take it down and, hey, look, it's done. So my Vagrant provisioned the VM, installed Docker and Docker Compose, then it did the Docker thing, and all my services have come up inside of Vagrant. I can now Vagrant SSH into that machine, and now I have basically a nice workshop environment to work from. I'm going to Vagrant destroy. Is that the, do I have to say down or stop first? Yes, shutting it down, destroying. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the Docker. So I will, one other quick thing is you see I am standing up this workshop environment and taking it down with relative ease. One nice feature of that is if you're done for today and you're like, I would like to resume this workshop later, but you know, I don't want to lose my state. We have taken care for that. So you can take down this this workshop environment with Docker Compose down. If you do not provide the -v flag, that means also destroy the volumes, then all your state from the workshop will be preserved. So you can say Docker Compose down, free up those resources on your workstation, and then you can come back and just Docker Compose up again, and the workshop environment will come back with all of your state, exactly where you left off. So that's a little tip for the future at the end of our workshop today. Using Windows Air, okay, that's the SMB, and that, again, that's a port conflict. Did you get okay messages for all the other services, Bryce? Yeah, you can probably ignore that for today. This is the same thing that David called out, and probably something we can just update the workshop to work around that port conflict in the future. We'll use a non-standard port there. Okay, so it sounds like at least one person is ready to move on to the next step. If you're seeing this, you know, exit 0 and healthy output here, some of you may see an error on the Sensu assets SMB. That's going to be this port 445 port conflict. That's okay to ignore for today. The next step we want to take is we have provided for Mac and Linux users an environment file. It has some environment variables, and for Windows users, a PowerShell environment file. And we need to sort of load those environment variables into our environment. So I'm going to do that here. So I can say source envarc, and then you can, on a Mac, I can see, or a Linux machine, I'm sorry, I could see my environment variables like so. In a Windows environment with PowerShell, you can check the output of your environment variables with a slightly more confusing command, but it's there and available, so you can copy and paste that. And if you see, some of these values may be updated, but if you see all this output, then you're good to go and ready to move on to the next step. If I can get a few thumbs up in the chat when everybody has the workshop environment up and running. So Bryce is there, Troy's there, Caleb's there. Is it Alejandro? I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. You were making progress, so hopefully on your way. Gustav is there, David's there. Great, fantastic. All right, I'll just share a few comments. Let's see, we're not going to talk about troubleshooting guide. There are some common troubleshooting things sort of provided here in the bottom of this lesson. Maybe we will either document this port conflict or just make that go away in a future update. One thing, if you are, you know, going through this workshop on your own ever in the future, or going on to one of the new lessons, we've provided feedback links here that if you click them, it takes you right into a GitHub issue, and we would appreciate your feedback. That's how we will continue to improve the workshop over time. All right, let's all jump into the next lesson, that is getting yourself introduced to the Sensu command line tool. So I'm going to go ahead and move ahead because we have a good chunk of folks who are confirming they're ready to move to the next step. I will say, if you get stuck or fall behind, it may still be valuable to just follow along, just watch the presentation so you know what to expect as you work through this workshop on your own. It is absolutely intended to be a self-guided training. So just following along to see how it's supposed to work, or how it will work when you have more time, will be great. So our goal for this lesson is we're going to introduce the Sensu Cuddle command line tool. You'll learn how to install and configure the tool and perform some basic operations. Again, this is intended for all Sensu users. So the Sensu Cuddle command line tool is short for Sensu control. We basically modeled Sensu Cuddle very closely after kubectl, the Kubernetes command line tool. And so if you are using tools like, thanks for sharing the link in the chat, Troy. So we're moved on to lesson 3. If you are familiar with any sort of modern DevOps tooling, command line interfaces, you should feel right at home with Sensu Cuddle. The UI, if you will, around the command line tool, it should be quite familiar. So our goal, our first step is to get you familiar with it, is to install the Sensu Cuddle CLI. So if you want to view and manage resources in Sensu from the command line or from a script, we'll talk about that as we go, you'll need Sensu Cuddle. So let's install Sensu Cuddle. Again, make sure you probably don't need to rerun this command unless you have like exited your shell or opened a new shell. But go ahead and reload those environment variables. Make sure they are present in your environment. And then we have provided a sort of copy and paste install script. I am on a Linux workstation, so I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to come over here and paste this command. It's going to download. And I'm pretty sure this command is going to fail with permissions errors on my machine. Your mileage may vary. I can easily fix that by rerunning this command with sudo. And now I can say which Sensu Cuddle, it installed right where I expected it. And I can say Sensu Cuddle version. And that version matches the version that we expected in the workshop. So give me some thumbs up when you have Sensu Cuddle installed on your machine. Don't forget, we have these handy copy and paste buttons here that you can use on your workstation. Also, if you are, the less trusting type of operator based on vast experience with computers, then oops, I muted myself. Then you can sort of take this second step with a grain of salt. You can inspect the contents of this tarball and just copy the Sensu Cuddle binary. I think depending on which platform you're on, you might get an agent and Sensu Cuddle installed. If you don't want to do that, you can proceed with caution, but they're safe. Okay, moving on to, I'll wait for some thumbs up that we have Sensu Cuddle installed, and before we go on to the next exercise. And let me know if you're getting too much background noise from my system. I have landscape contractors just showed up in my front yard. David's there. I'll be curious when we get to the end of the workshop if the friends on this webinar or workshop who are quietly observing and not participating, sometimes it's because they just want to watch. Sometimes it's because they've gone way ahead of us. So hopefully there will be a little bit of both today, and hopefully you're having a good time. If you are secretly way ahead of us and you get stuck and want to ask a question, don't be afraid to put it in the chat. That is sort of by design. This is intended to be a self-guided set of learning resources. So Gustav is there. I didn't look in the chat when I asked everyone to introduce themselves. Did we get some cool intros? Guten Tag. Walnut Creek, California. Cool. Germany. Nice. I don't know whereabouts Bonn is, but my last major vacation in the before times, before the pandemic, was 3 weeks in Germany from flew into Berlin, then flew up to flew into Munich, then took a flight to Berlin, and then hired a vehicle and drove all across the country, all the way back down to Munich. It was really, really cool. North Carolina, nice, cool. Thanks for those intros. I'll wait for one more thumbs up. I'll wait for one more thumbs up, and then we'll go ahead to the next exercise. And while we're waiting, how are you finding this to follow so far? The folks who are engaged in the chat, is this pretty straightforward so far? We're going to start doing Sensu things in the next exercise, so that should be fun. Nice. Are you ready to go, Bryce? Did I miss your video thumbs up? No? Okay, Bryce is almost there. While we are waiting, there's a little bit of discussion here ahead of the next step. So I'll just explain what's going to happen next. So Sensu is an API, a set of APIs, depending on how you think about APIs, or an API. And basically everything that happens in Sensu is a result of some action taken by those APIs. And so the primary function of our command line tool is to manage Sensu via those APIs, or manage resources in Sensu via those APIs. We do this with basic CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete with those APIs. And Sensu Cuddle basically is an API client. There's also a web UI for a web app for Sensu that is also an API client. At the end of the day, those are just interfaces to our APIs. And so Sensu Cuddle as an API client needs to know where is the backend. In this case, we have everything installed locally. When you deploy Sensu inside of your organization, you may have it deployed inside of your AWS environment or other cloud provider. If you have heterogeneous infrastructure, maybe some on-premise infrastructure, you may have on-premises, you may have Sensu deployed there. So we need to know where is Sensu. That's the Sensu API URL or backend URL. How are we going to authenticate? There are many different authentication mechanisms in Sensu. The CLI supports all of them, including a special workflow for OIDC-based authentication. What namespace are you managing resources in? Oops, was there a question? Maybe an inadvertent unmute. So what namespace are you managing resources in by default? So Sensu is a multi-tenant platform, sort of like Kubernetes, where you can create namespaces and manage resources separately. This is very useful for onboarding new teams onto your Sensu platform. The CLI can output data in a variety of formats. There's like a tabular, sort of human readable format, but it can also do other formats. So let's go ahead to configuring Sensu, the Sensu Cuddle command line tool. So the scenario is we've all just installed Sensu Cuddle, and now we need to configure it to interact with Sensu. So we will run the Sensu Cuddle configure command. Oops, let me do what I've been encouraging others to do and copy this and come over here and paste it. Now, this is going to prompt me through the various different settings here. So I'm going to hit enter to choose username and password authentication. If it doesn't pre-populate your backend URL with the default localhost, you can type that in, http://127.0.0.1, port 8080, hit enter, namespace default, I'll hit enter. My preferred output format from the command line tool is the tabular, like human readable format. I can use my arrow keys here to pick a different one, but I would encourage you for now to choose tabular. Username, Sensu, let me spell that correctly, and password Sensu. For our workshop, we just make that easy. And that's it. If I don't get an error message, I am successfully configured. And I can go look at step number 2 to verify that. I can copy the Sensu Cuddle config view command. And when I paste that here, I see I'm connected. I have an auth token. My command line tool is taking care for the authentication handshake. And I am ready to move on to the next step. So give me some thumbs up when you are configured with Sensu Cuddle. Was that a thumbs up, Bryce? Yep. So there's one. Gustav, very good. David, very good. Troy, I think I saw your thumbs up. Still with us? Yep. All right, very good. Let's go ahead on to our next exercise. So we have as an API, there are other ways to interact with that API. You can do it from other clients. Thanks, Aaron, for your thumbs up. And maybe you want to use third-party tools or embed some API interaction into some other product or service inside of your organization. And to authenticate there, you might prefer to use an API, a revocable API key, instead of like a user account with username and password. So we have a tool for that in Sensu. We have an API key solution. So you can create API keys using the API key grant command. So I'm going to copy this now, and I'll explain what this command is doing. So Sensu Cuddle is our tool. API key is a command, and then the grant sub command. Then you give it a username. Since we are logged in as the Sensu user, we want to create an API key for the Sensu user. And if you see some output here, then you're ready to move on to the next step. So that API key grant command created some output that includes a UUID. So we want to save that UUID portion of the output as an environment variable. And to do that, we're going to modify our environment file, that .envarc file that we provided. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come over here to my editor and and paste that. Uncomment this line, that's very important. Save it, and then Sensu Cuddle, then I'm going to source that file. Some extra tools installed on my machine, and now I can see that my API key is available in my environment. So yeah, save that API key into your environment file, then source that environment file, whether you're on a Mac or Windows machine. Make sure you're editing the envarc PowerShell file, not the envarc file if you're on Windows. So once you can see the output of your, once you can see that your API key is available in your environment, then we're ready to move on to the next step. Oh, Ben gave a nice note to everybody. I wasn't sure if that was a private message in the chat. So Ben is a longtime Sensu user and contributor to open source plugins. So you will see Ben floating around GitHub repositories and the Sensu community discourse. His online username, I'm sure he won't be upset with me sharing, is Major Moses. So if you see him there, he's a great resource to help you learn Sensu. Thanks, Ben, for joining the workshop and saying hello. So give me some thumbs up when you've got your API key, and we can move on to the next exercise. I saw one from Bryce. Troy, I'm sure you're there. David, Gustav, very good. All right, so now let's interact with Sensu using the command line tool. So if you want to explore what resources are under management by Sensu, you can do that now. We're going to do that with, I'm actually going to show just a little bit of an extra demo here. So if I say Sensu Cuddle help, you can see there are a ton of commands for the different types of resources that you can manage in Sensu. We're going to use the namespace resource as an example. So let me actually copy this command and I'll paste it here. So I can see in my in our local Sensu deployment, we actually have two namespaces. We have our default namespace and a trainee namespace. We can look at users by copying the Sensu Cuddle user list command. And I see by default, there is an agent user. We have our user, a cluster administrator that we're logged in as, and an example additional user profile that has some role-based access controls configured for it in case you are interested in exploring that. And there's that pro tip. If you want to see what else Sensu can do, use the help command. I'll even show you that you can use help on the subcommands. So if you want to know what is available in one of the subcommands, we even have like good documentation on what's available there. All right, next, let's go and do one of the very popular use cases in Sensu, which is getting inventory data, real-time inventory data right from your terminal. So you have nodes under management by Sensu is the scenario. You want to be able to see those systems, maybe automate some tasks. And it'd be very cool if you had machine readable data come out of that, like JSON. So we're going to use the Sensu Cuddle entity list command. So entities are the API resource that we use in Sensu. That's sort of like the lowest common denominator of anything that you may be monitoring with Sensu, whether that's a VM, a pod in Kubernetes, a network device, some remote third-party API. So I can run the Sensu Cuddle entity list command to see a list of those entities. And if I want to see detailed information about those entities, I can use the Sensu Cuddle entity info command. In this case, I'm giving it the name of an entity that we have sort of preceded in the environment. And then if I want to see that entity information in JSON format, I add the format command. So remember, we configured our command line tool to by default give us tabular output, but you can override that on a per command basis with the -- format flag. And this becomes really, really cool when you combine it with other tools. So if you don't have JQ installed on your machine, you're going to get an error when you run this last command. But if I show you what that looks like, JQ is like a JSON Explorer utility for your workstation. So I can at least get like a pretty formatted thing there. I can then, drill down into like certain properties of the thing or and so on. And that works even like Sensu Cuddle entity list format JSON, pipe that to JQ, and what operating systems do I have under management? Oops, in Sensu, I can see like this. Pretty cool. So there's like, you can start to imagine the possibilities. We provide even a query utility here. So you could say Sensu Cuddle entity list, field selector, and then I could say .system.os equals Linux, and it's like that. Yeah. So you can like filter for like a subset of devices. There's lots of capabilities there we're not going to get into today. Okay, thumbs up if you are sort of grokking the idea of, let's see, Bryce is saying I have no entities because I don't have any results. So a quick little troubleshooting step, Bryce, if you run this Docker compose up command again, and there's no harm in doing that. If one of the provisioning steps didn't complete successfully, this will give it a chance to do so. And what you should see is this configurator container should exit 0. Well, actually, I don't know. It won't show you that here in the output. So if you say Docker compose PS, then you'll get just a snapshot of the status of your systems. You can run that command over and over again. You should eventually see this configurator job exit 0. That will, one of the things it's doing for us is sort of preceding the workshop environment with some resources like the ones we're looking at here. The other thing I would ask you to do as a troubleshooting step is Sensu Cuddle config view. Are you seeing the default namespace there? Yep. Okay. So if you Sensu Cuddle entity list namespace default, we can be super verbose. You should see one like randomly named entity that's our agent, and this learn.sensu.io entity that is just some seed data we have installed in the workshop. No. Shoot, that is unfortunate. I think we can continue with the workshop despite that. I think that's not a failure of the Sensu product, but rather the automation in our workshop. Maybe there's a bug we'll have to investigate there. We can actually try running this command. I'll put it in the chat. Sensu Cuddle create -rf config sensu seeds. Yeah. That's basically all that you're missing in your workshop environment. So try running that command. Oops, I DM'd that to Troy instead of sending it to everyone. Try running that command, which I put in the chat, and then run the Sensu Cuddle entity list command, and then you should see at least one entity there. Unknown command. Sensu Cuddle. Oh, you're missing create. Sensu Cuddle create -rf. Yeah. We're getting ahead of ourselves because this is the very next exercise. It's very similar to this one. But let me know if it runs with no error output, then you've created those seed resources. You're seeing it now. Perfect. All right. So Sensu is a monitoring as code solution. So we manage resource configuration data using plain text, declarative config files. Basically, these are YAML and JSON files. Excuse me. And so, yeah, you define resources in YAML or JSON format. Then the Sensu Cuddle create command basically reads the contents of that file and sends it to the Sensu API. Sensu API will validate the configuration of those resources. And again, it is going to bring the system into the desired state. So you're more or less making a request saying, this is my desired state for the system, and asking Sensu to take care for that. You can then manage those configuration files in your source code repository. You can wire up Sensu in your CI/CD pipeline also. So if you're making a change to how your monitoring works, the CI/CD, you can commit those changes in a PR, merge them. CI/CD can use Sensu Cuddle basically and bring the Sensu system into the desired state. We can do all of this manually as well. There are export utilities built into Sensu. So we have this dump command. So you can like export the data out of Sensu if you've perhaps done a workshop and you've sort of manually configured the system and you're like, oh, this is cool. I want to check this into a Git repository. You can use the dump command to get data out. So we're going to look at some of these capabilities now in exercise 6. So you have an entity in a running Sensu environment, but you don't have a YAML file that describes it. So if I hadn't just shown the secret location of those YAML files, you wouldn't know where it was. So let's pretend that we want to save that resource to a file. To accomplish this, we're going to use the Sensu Cuddle entity info command with the -- format flag, save it to a file. Then we're going to modify that file, and then we're going to sort of upload it back into the system. So the first step is to copy this command. And so that if I just take off the redirection here, I'm going to get some YAML output from this command. I could just copy that YAML output and then go to my editor, create a file called entity and save it here. All the same. And so that's how to get the data out. Now let's modify this resource. So let's change the subscriptions list in this example. And I'm going to do that in my editor. So I have already one subscription. This is a YAML array. I'm going to add a second subscription. What were you suggesting? Workshop test. So we'll explain what subscriptions are later on in the workshop. So I'm saving this workshop test. And oh, whoa, we blew past when we said we were going to take a break. Good reminder, Troy. So we'll do that in just a moment. And that will also give us a chance to check in and help catch some folks up if anyone got stuck. So now that I've modified this file, I can now upload it back into Sensu. So I'm going to do Sensu Cuddle create-f entity.yaml, copy and paste. And then now I can re-inspect this resource in the Sensu API. And so if I say, show me the information for this entity, now I'm seeing it has this additional subscription property added to it. Whereas before it just had the one subscription property. So that's a very small example of how to modify resources. Entity, like the devices that we have under management, are just one of those resources which we can modify. Some closing comments around Sensu Cuddle, the command line tool. You've learned what it is. You've learned that it's an API client, how to interact with APIs, how to get an API key, so we could interact with those APIs from other tools, such as we will do in our upcoming exercises. And as a little sidebar, you also have available at your localhost port 3000 a web app for Sensu. And so I can go and see all the same stuff which we have been looking at from Sensu Cuddle, including everyone except for Bryce. You have two entities here. Bryce, you should at least have this one entity. And I can see I can see the configuration resources, which I haven't created any yet. But if I go look at this entity that I updated, I will see in my web UI that workshop test subscription added there as well. So this is a good place for us to take a break. How about just quick 5 minutes, because we're going to be running out of time. Our goal today was not to get to the end of the workshop, by the way. We're basically have shown you how the workshop works. So let's take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back and resume with starting to configure our pipeline with an introduction to handlers. I will stay here in case anyone has questions in the chat, or you can unmute. And I have this handy little timer on my desk, so I'm going to push the 5-minute button, and it's going to chime when our break is done. I saw a typo we can fix, Troy. Where was it?
I love typos. They're my favorite thing.
Where was it? Unless it was just here it is. Unless my eyeballs are going crazy. Right here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that is not a real domain. Yeah. You know what that is? That's a Vim mobile artifact. I was already in insert mode, and then I hit I to go into insert mode.
Yep. Yep.
You will see those littered throughout.
Superfluous lowercase letter I characters spread throughout the documentation.
Like :W, you'll see a lot of :W on new lines.
Vim artifacts, I like that. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to take this moment to go grab myself a water. I'll be right back. All right. Bubbly water. Okay. Give ourselves a couple more minutes here. I would say we were being quiet because it's early, but that's relative. As we've seen already, some members of this workshop are in Europe. I'm in Portland, Oregon, West Coast, Pacific time. My coffee's kicking in now, so my energy level will be higher at the end of talking for 90 minutes than at the beginning.
One of the downsides of working from home is that my coffee making sitch only makes 1 cup at a time, which means like if I want to go get another one, I'm going to be gone for like 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. I can't just like go grab one and run back real fast.
Wait, are you a Keurig person? Or you're muted.
Oops. No, I'm an AeroPress person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's very, very few things I miss about being in an office, but the unlimited coffee supply really is one of them.
Yeah. Get up from desk, push button, receive coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like pour it out of the mug or whatever.
Well, and also these days my kids are doing school from home, and so if I go into the kitchen, usually that involves some hijacking by the kids to show me the latest drawing or ask questions about school, like that.
The water cooler, is alive and well in your home.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But we have great hallway conversations. Lots of innovative ideas come up, and
nice.
Yeah.
They're like, Dad, I have an idea for your 20% time.
Actually, we were just talking about that. So my kids are really into anime, and there's a category of kind of like stuff that's similar to anime called visual novels, where they use like a game engine to basically make like an interactive sort of storyline with little anime characters as sprites that move around and stuff, with dialogues and all that. Anyway, we were talking about making a visual novel. We've experimented with a Python engine for making those in the past for the Among Us app, and brainstorming on that last night. It was pretty cool. So yeah, that's what I'll be distracted with for like the next 3 weeks.
All right, I just got the chime that our 5 minutes are up. In my former life as a CEO of a tech startup, I was in a CEO group where one of the other CEOs in my group was CEO of a visual novel gaming company. And so I know a lot about visual novels, a lot more than I ever thought I would know. So super random sidebar, which we can continue at another time. Okay, so lesson 4 should be pretty quick. We'll try and knock this one out, and then we have a couple slides to go back to close out the workshop, and thank you all for your time. So our goal for this lesson, we are going to introduce ourselves to handlers and show us how to configure an alert handler and a metrics handler. Again, this lesson is intended for anyone who wants to use Sensu. So what are handlers? Handlers, if you saw in that diagram we showed in the beginning of the workshop that had the pipeline going left to right, on the right hand, we were using the verbs there: filter, transform, process. The features in Sensu are called filters, mutators, and handlers. So handlers are actions the Sensu backend executes on incoming observability events. So configuring, again, our emphasis at Sensu is not on collecting the data, even though that's one of Sensu's strengths, but rather what can you do with the data once you've collected it? So that's where we start when we're learning Sensu. It's one of the most important things to do when you're using Sensu is set up. What do you want to integrate Sensu with? That can be like, hey, I want to get notifications in PagerDuty and Slack, and I want to store all my metrics in Sumo Logic. Handlers can be used to send alerts, store observability data, create and resolve incidents, as I said, or trigger automated remediations. We're going to create 2 handlers in these exercises. The most common type of handler in Sensu is the pipe handler. This is literally Sensu takes incoming event data and feeds it to an executable via standard input. So you can write custom handlers for Sensu in any programming language in the world, as long as they can accept actually string data via standard input, because that string data may have been mutated and be no longer JSON. But for the most part, you should expect a JSON formatted Sensu event in those handlers. There are a ton of these available in Bonsai. It's like the Docker hub for Sensu, where you'll find tons of interesting integrations, first party and third party ones. So to configure a handler though, it's quite simple. And we're going to do that now. So the scenario is we are members of an SRE team, and we want to get notifications via Slack, or in the case of our workshop, Rocket Chat. And so we want to do like some chat op stuff here. To do this, we're going to use the Rocket Chat handler. This is a link, I think, to the GitHub repository. Yes, indeed. And that's going to send event data to a Rocket Chat instance running on in our workshop environment. So let's copy the contents of this file, and in our editors, create a new file called rocketchat.yaml. I'm going to open that file over here, paste these contents, and I'm going to save it. And then we'll be ready for our next step. While you are going through those steps, I'll sort of explain what's being explained down here. So here's our handler resource. Every resource in Sensu sort of has these same 4 top-level attributes. There's an API resource type. What API version is it? If we introduce new features, we can do so without breaking backwards compatibility. Resources have metadata that's usually a name, a namespace, labels, and annotations. If you leave the namespace out, when we do the next step we're about to do, then Sensu Cuddle uses that default namespace that we configured. And then you can add custom metadata, and everything under spec. I usually like to introduce this much sooner. Everything under spec, you should expect to find details about that in the Sensu documentation. We have really thorough documentation. So we are looking at a handler resource. I can come down here and see the handler specification. So we have like extremely detailed reference documentation that tells you what's every single field available under the spec resource, or the spec portion of this resource. And in our case, that spec is saying, hey, this is a pipe handler. This is the command I want to execute. These arguments here are arguments of that command. The runtime asset is where I'm fetching that command from. We'll talk about that in a later exercise. We're using secrets management with this, so the secrets that we're going to provide to this handler are also being managed by Sensu. Okay, so let's create this handler now. So we'll copy this command here, Sensu Cuddle create. And then we will make sure that it was created successfully by looking at the Sensu Cuddle handler list output. So I'm going to copy that, and I will see a list of handlers. I make my font like super small. Oops. Then that fits all on one line, but I'm going to make it big so you can see on my screen share. So yeah, I run the Sensu Cuddle handler list. I have just the one handler configured now. That's our expected output, and we are done with this exercise. So let me get my chat open, and some thumbs up if you have created your handler. Thumbs up. All right, got a couple thumbs up. Okay, now as a second exercise, we're going to create a metrics handler that you will use later on in the workshop, much later on than we'll get to today. And again, Sensu is designed to be a pipeline for observability events, but Sensu itself does not provide a store for those events. So we're trying to solve this problem of disparate data sources, where you may have this tool over here has its own database, this tool over here has its own database, but likely inside of your organization, you have standardized on a data platform like Sumo Logic. So why don't we get all of that data into one place That's the goal, our worldview at Sensu. So if you want to store historical metrics and other events, you need to configure a handler for those metrics. So again, in Sensu, all that data we normalize as events. Some of those events contain metrics. And so we have a built-in filtering function in Sensu that says, hey, I only want to process events containing metrics. That's this has metrics filter. So let's use that in our following exercise. So the scenario is we want to store metrics in a data platform like Sumo Logic. If I was giving this presentation in a different audience, maybe you are using different tools. Sensu works with all of them. But for today, it's really easy.
Into multiple data platforms at once, because most people
you can collect
stuck in between a couple different
things. If you are adopting Sumo Logic in your organization and you have a different data platform that has previously been in use, and you need to get the data into both for a period of time, Sensu can do that. You can collect once and write multiple times. It's pretty cool. So we're going to use our Sensu Sumo Logic integration for this, and let's copy this YAML contents, create a file called sumologic.yaml. And I'm going to go to my editor. Whoa. Where'd that file? Why am I not seeing my, oh, here it is, paste those contents, hit save. The next step, you could probably already guess now how this workflow works. I'm going to create -f and then give me the Sensu Cuddle handler list. So now I see I have a Rocket Chat handler and a Sumo Logic metrics handler. And we are more or less at time. So I'm gonna skip ahead briefly and show you what to expect in the next lesson. So in lesson 5, we are gonna talk about events, and then we will start to create some events manually from the command line. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that here. I just created an event in Sensu. I can, this is a different Sensu dashboard. I can see that event, which I created here, but I will not see that. I will not see that event in Rocket Chat. I won't see it appear here yet. So that's intentional. So if I go back to the workshop and continue to the second exercise, I'll create another event. We're just using the Sensu APIs for this. So if I create another event now, this event will contain, importantly, a field that says which pipe, like how do I want to process this data? Which handlers do I want to process this data with? Since I'm saying Rocket Chat, now I would expect to see that alert appear inside of Rocket Chat. This is the same thing you would expect if you were using Slack or maybe getting a notification via PagerDuty. And then if I zoom out, I'm going to actually go back to, sorry for jumping around here, but if I go back to our slides, which is how we will end our presentation today, that will be, so we're getting introduced to events. So we're manually creating some events to flow through this pipeline. Then the next exercises, the next lesson, we'll say, okay, now that we can sort of manually create events through this pipeline, let's configure some filters so we can see, how we can control how and when those events are processed. And that's sort of the end of our manual event production, because then we're going to install an agent and see how the product works together. So these intermediate lessons here are really just to help us understand the internals of Sensu. In lesson 7, you'll install your first agent and configure it. Then you will configure some actual monitoring checks in lesson 8. Then you're going to have the full automated solution sort of in place. So that's what to look forward to in the end of the workshop. To summarize, what did we do today? We got you introduced to this concept of monitoring as code. We got you introduced to Sensu Go. We got you set up with a workshop environment. Except for Bryce, we'll figure out how to help you get that fixed. And we got you familiarized with Sensu Cuddle, the command line tool, and the Sensu API. And really, we showed you how this workshop resource works so you can continue at your own pace. We think if you spent an afternoon and looked at every link and sort of read the supplementary content that we provided, you can get from beginning to the end of the workshop at your own pace in an afternoon. And reminder that there are new workshop lessons coming soon. If you're interested in going further with Sensu, Sensu itself is completely free up to your first 100 nodes under management. So that's a really fantastic free tier that's available in Sensu with all the commercial features. We are announcing a new offering that packages Sensu plus Sumo Logic for analytics with node-based pricing. You can learn more about that during Illuminate, but also by visiting the Sensu website. If you want to talk to Troy and myself, please join our discourse. Maybe Troy, you can drop that link in the chat. And what we showed you today was just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to see more in a one-on-one setting, as we mentioned before, you can ask your account manager at Sumo Logic to get in touch with us, or just go directly to the Sensu website, fill out our contact form, and we will be in touch. If you let them know that you attended this workshop, the person who responds to you will make sure that Troy or myself or both of us are present if we set up a call. And thank you so much for your time. I hope you really enjoy the rest of Illuminate. Tons of good content to look forward to. Look out for cameo appearances by myself in other presentations. And I hope you have a great week. Thanks, everyone.
We're also going to do this session again later on today. So if something got interrupted and you were just listening this time, but you want to like actually get hands-on next time, feel free to join the later session and watch us do this all again.
Yeah, I think that both of our sessions were at capacity, so it might not let you, but you could always try. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Bryce, and everyone else who participated. Thanks, everyone who was quietly following along. We hope you enjoyed this and have a good day.